we're kind of covering the 10 of the best, the elite, the forerunners, the top echelon of Sahaba. Those were the 10 who were promised Jannah. They were promised paradise while they were alive, which is truly fascinating. And of the first of the 10 was Abu Bakr anhu, who is the closest companion of the Prophet ﷺ. He was his best friend. He was the first free man who became Muslim. He was the first believer. He's the one who believed in the Isra and Mi'raj and therefore earned the title As-Siddiq. The one who absolutely believes Prophet ﷺ. And when he was questioned on that, he says, well, I believe in something way bigger than that. I believe that he receives revelation from the skies, from God. So this is small potatoes. So definitely, if he said this, then I believe him 100%. And the Prophet ﷺ even said that there is no person that I had invited to the deen except that they had some element of doubt, and it took them some time until they were fully convinced, except for Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. And I'm paraphrasing that hadith, and I quoted it before. And his virtues are unmatched, and his weight in the ummah is unmatched. And there's even a hadith that talks about that. When he was put in the scales versus the ummah, he outweighs them. After him was Umar ibn al-Khattab, and he outweighed the ummah. And that hadith is, I believe, in Ibn Majah, but I quoted it as well in the last live. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Abdullah ibn Abi Quhafa, as we've covered, we've gone through most of his journey. Now, what we've done is touch on the main highlights. Obviously, there's a lot more to it, but the reason that we're doing these lives in this series is to just get an idea. There are people, like I said before, who are far more learned than I am, who have a much more in-depth understanding of the biography and the history of Abu Bakr and all the Sahaba. And those people you should get your knowledge from. My job is simply to introduce you to the door, open the door, inshallah, and then you can walk that path. But to understand who these people were, because we are in a time where we take a great deal of admiration towards people who are tafhin. Roughly translated, they are silly. I don't know how to translate tafah any more than a person who's not really worthy of anything. They just talk nonsense. They could be actors and actresses, people who even go on social media, and they don't really provide anything of value to the world, other than perhaps embarrassing themselves and ridiculing themselves for a few laughs, likes, and shares to gain a sense of popularity for a short time period, so they can say that they're famous or make some money at the expense of embarrassing themselves and losing their honor and dignity. Yet we admire these people. We think they're hilarious. We think they're great. And we put them on a pedestal. When in reality, like I keep saying, we have people who are more than worthy of such a pedestal in our lives. And it is because of their sacrifices, their actions, what they did at the right time is why we are where we are today. In terms of our ability to receive the deen, in terms of our ability to learn from these people, because they had to go through these sacrifices, because they were the example that would be set out for the rest of the Muslim Ummah until the Day of Judgment. We still reference them today, 1,400 and some years later. We go back to the characters of the likes of Umar ibn Khattab, Talha, Az-Zubayr. We go to the likes of Abdurrahman ibn Auf. We go to the likes of Abu Bakr. We go to the likes of all these great people, because we derive from their character and from their story how we are meant to hold ourselves today. And so then it becomes incumbent upon us to understand these people, because they literally set the example for us. كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر. And the Quran speaks of the Sahaba. It says that you are the best of nations revealed or released or given to the people. You would enjoin what is good and forbid what is evil. They were the best of the people. And Allah's declaring this in the Quran. They're the best. So that's the role model. That's who we're supposed to be like. So then we have to know, what were they like? What was their life like? A lot of us know some of those names, right? And we know a few of their highlights. Abu Bakr was, the first caliph, great. Umar ibn Khattab was the second caliph, and he did a couple of things, great. But there's more to that. What happened with their lives? How did they act and react? What did they do? Who did they deal with? How did they deal with it? And that's what we don't know. And that's key. The details are key for us to understand how to navigate our own lives in today's world, with all of its difficulties and all of its intricacies. That's what we're trying to do with this, inshallah. And so we covered his birth, his early life, we covered his childhood, his marriage, his kids, his siblings. his genealogy and his firasa. We covered how he embraced Islam and what he did right after in terms of da'wah, verbally, and using his wealth to free the slaves. We covered his preparation for the hijrah from Mecca to Medina with Rasulullah. We covered the departure and the cave, the story therein. We covered the journey to Medina and their arrival in Medina. We covered the construction of the masjid, the first masjid in Masjid Qubba, the one that was built just in the outskirts of Medina, and the significance of that in an Islamic sense, and the hadith that cover that. The role after Hijrah, what he did in Medina, who he stayed with, his involvement in the battles, Battle of Badr, the Battle of Uhud, and the Battle of Tabuk, his relationship with the Prophet ﷺ, and then his contribution and what he did to hold the Ummah together at the death of the Prophet ﷺ. And people were starting to naturally malfunction and, were overwhelmed by the emotion of grief that the Prophet ﷺ had passed away, that it even shook one of the strongest characters that we know, Umar ibn Khattab, to his core, that it brought him down to his knees. And Abu Bakr had to reiterate a verse to him, to which Umar ibn Khattab responds and says, is that verse in the Quran? Even though he knows it, but he shook to his core with the news that he had heard that the Prophet ﷺ had passed away. So now we get to the next stage in the story. The Rasul ﷺ has passed away. The Muslims need a leader. Medina is made up of two main groups from the Muslim side. Now, there are Jews and there's Christians, but from the Muslim side there are two main groups. There's the Muhajirin, the immigrants who came from Mecca, and then there's the Ansar, the supporters, who were in Medina, who offered their houses, who offered their food, who offered their wealth, who offered their everything that they had. They said, take whatever you need, we will support you fully. Very similar to how we support immigrants today coming from war-torn countries. SubhanAllah, there's a lesson in there as to how we're meant to help those people who are forced into the situations that they're in. It's not like, a person came from Syria, for example, or Somal, or Kashmir, comes to the UK because they're dying to come here. They want to really integrate with the West, and they want to be a part of this great culture, and they want to be part of the great United Kingdom and so forth, the States or Canada, whatever country it is in the West. It's not that they wanted to leave their families and their cultures and their ways of lives and their homes and their friends. They didn't want to leave that. They were forced into this position. And most of them had to come with whatever, the clothes on their back, essentially, whatever they could carry, if that. Because a lot of them came, especially when we're talking about the Syrian refugees, they came by boat. They came illegally because they had no other option. A lot of them died on the way, subhanAllah. And those who made it had whatever they could carry with them. What's that going to be? And they come to a new country with a new culture, with a new language, to try to make a living, just to provide for their families. Those people have sacrificed a lot. And it wasn't out of free will. It's not like I got up because I wanted to go to the UK. They were good where they were. They wanted to stay. This is their homeland. Yet they were forced into this position. And the receiving end is not so understanding of that sometimes, subhanAllah, which was very sad. Allah could have put us in that position. Allah could have made us one of those refugees who had to take a boat from Libya or from Egypt to cross the sea with all of its waves and die along the way. That could have been us. But Allah decided in His infinite wisdom and mercy that we wouldn't be on that side, that we would be on the receiving end. And that comes with its own responsibilities that we need to understand. And we can see that with the Ansar, how they acted and reacted when the Muhajirin came, and how they took care of them, how they opened their arms, and they opened their homes, and they opened everything that they had. They said, just take, I need you to be comfortable. That's how they treated the immigrants who came, subhanAllah. And so the Muhajirin and Ansar are the two main groups in Medina. The Prophet ﷺ, who was the leader, who was a father figure, who was the commander, who was the chief, who was the man in charge, ﷺ, has passed away. The Muslims get together and they're trying to decide who the next leader is. The Muhajirin, the immigrants, the ones who traveled from Mecca, they want someone from their side. The Ansar, the supporters, the locals of Medina, want somebody from their side. And so everybody's presenting their case. Like, no, it should be from our side. No, it should be from our side. And they're going back and forth. Umar ibn Khattab stands up in this group. They're sitting in a room. They're gathered. And they're deciding who the next leader should be. Umar ibn Khattab stands up and he takes Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu by the hand. And he says, and I'm paraphrasing here, he says, You are the most beloved to the Rasul ﷺ, and you are the most fit of all of us to lead us. I pledge my allegiance. He gives bay'ah to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And everybody sees that, and they all accept unanimously. There is no back and forth. There is no let's discuss this, let's take this home. They're like, that's it. You are the new leader. Take over. And that was made evident by a lot of the actions of the Prophet ﷺ, in terms of, for example, that he told Abu Bakr specifically to lead the prayer. That was one of the biggest ones. But there were other mentions and references that Abu Bakr was the next in charge. The next in line. Even his mention in the Quran that we talked about. He was the closest companion. Even the Rasul ﷺ has singled out Abu Bakr in front of the Sahaba, against all the Sahaba, that nobody has the same stance as him. And he made this clear on multiple occasions. Nobody can touch Abu Bakr. This guy's a red line. Nobody crosses this line. And so everybody understood his position in the eyes of the Rasul ﷺ, and so it made perfect sense. There was nothing to argue. There wasn't even a second thought. Abu Bakr is the next leader. So he assumes now the caliphate, and he becomes the first Khalifa of the Muslim Ummah. Right? Now, his Khilafah, his caliphate, lasts 2 years and 3 months. It's short-lived. Although short-lived, the achievements that were accomplished in those 2 years and 3 months, i.e. 27 months, were tremendous. There were a few main things that he covered in his caliphate that we're going to touch on, inshallah, right? The first one was the Ridda Wars. The Ridda, Hurub al-Ridda, the Ridda is the Murtad, the people who abandoned Islam. They went back to the Jahiliyyah ways. They left the fold of Islam. Those are the Murtaddeen. So that was called Hurub al-Ridda. The apostate, is that the word? The apostate wars. So what happened is in Arabia was kind of all fully under control under the Islamic rule, right? Not everybody was Muslim, but a good majority were. All the way from Bilad al-Sham, from the Levant region, all the way to the other side towards Yemen, and to the Arabian Gulf, towards Qatar, Oman, that area over there, Bahrain, and those areas, all the way down to Hijaz, to Mecca, to Medina. That entire region was pretty much Muslim governed. Because they had taken over everything. They were not a superpower in comparison, and we're going to cover the two superpowers, the Byzantine Empire and the Persian Empire, the Sassanids, but they were essentially carving out their dominance in the region. So a lot of the tribes had become Muslim, right? The tribal leaders. Now, if a tribal leader becomes Muslim, the tribe becomes Muslim. That's kind of how it works. Remember how I talked to you before in the last live about how the tribal mechanism works? If the chief says this, the chief of the tribe says, this is how it's going to be, everybody has to accept. There is no room for discussion. That's it. The chief said, it's like a Quran to them. They have to accept it whether they like it or not. So a lot of the chiefs become Muslim at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, in the different tribal areas across the Arabian Peninsula. Now, some of these chiefs, these tribal chiefs, became Muslim purely for political reasons. They had to affiliate themselves with Islam to not get into any issues, to gain protection, to be part of the bigger dominating force in the region. So they saw Islam was growing. They had a strong backing. They were taking over everything. So it's like, well, if I can't beat them, join them. That's the idea. So a lot of them pledged allegiance to the Rasul ﷺ, and they became Muslim. Now, the Rasul ﷺ passes away, and they start looking at themselves. They're like, well, is it really a point? I mean, it's probably going to crumble. They weren't in it with conviction. They were there for political gain. They were there for social gain, to make sure that their ways could still go. And I'm still going to be chief of my tribe, right? If I pledge allegiance to this Islam thing, I'm still good, right? You don't take over. I don't lose my power. I don't lose my throne. And this is what happened when the Rasul sent letters of invitation to Islam to the kings of Bahrain, to the kings of Oman, and so forth, these different places. Some of them retaliated. Some of them said yes and no. There was negotiations, but eventually they were worried about their throne. Would I still have power and dominion over my people? The Rasul said, yes, you will still have it. You can become Muslim and you still keep your region to yourself. And so once he dies, ﷺ, those ones start to think, and it's like, well, there's not really a point. Forget this. We're good. We don't need to associate ourselves with this ummah, this nation that's probably going to crumble anyway, and their leader is gone. So our deal is kind of broken now. We're good to backpedal. So a lot of them start to backpedal, and they start to leave Islam, and they do so by, first of all, not paying zakat. because the zakat is getting paid into Bayt al-Mal, into the Muslim treasury, right? That's what they're paying their zakat into, and that gets spread out to the people who need it. Now they're like, well, I don't need to pay. It's like a tax. I don't need to pay it anymore. I don't have to pay this tax, so I'm good to go. So they stop paying taxes. They stop paying zakat. Abu Bakr responds to this by saying, Wallahi, if they owed us a rope that they were paying as zakat, a rope, at the time of the Rasul, and they stopped it now, I will fight them for that rope. Yani, you will not backpedal even 1 inch on your obligations as a Muslim. So the wars start. As the tribes are starting to backpedal and they want to leave Islam, a few characters start making an appearance. People are like, well, the Rasul is gone. There isn't really an official leadership yet. Why don't I assume the reins? I mean, I can just, if they're almost going to crumble, if I can take power, I can kind of put them all under me, and now I'm the new leader. I'm the supreme lord of the region. And so you had a few liars who come up, right? A few false prophets who come up. One of them was a woman. She comes up and she assumes, she says that she's a prophet, and she starts to receive wahi, and she's making all this up, and she's talking to jinn and all kinds of things like that. And at one point she allies herself, well, she makes an alliance, she makes an alliance with Musaylama. Musaylama is the famous one. I think most of you guys already know who Musaylama was. Musaylama al-Kadhab, Musaylama the liar. He was the main he was like the boss of the false prophets, like he was the highest one. There was little mini false prophets running around, but they all got annihilated. There was this woman who claimed to be a prophet as well, and she eventually joins forces with Musaylama al-Kadhab to kind of, make a bigger army and, get stronger power and so forth, alliances, tribal stuff. Later on, she repents and backpedals, and she comes back to Islam. That's her story out of the way. She's not a big actor in this scenario. Musaylama al-Kadhab is the big bad guy. He gathers around 40,000 people, 40,000 followers, who start to believe that this guy is a real prophet and he is receiving actual revelation from God. And he's making up garbage the whole time. He's a kafir, he's a murtad, he's out of Islam, he's gone downhill, he lost his ways, and he starts scamming people. Essentially, he's one of those, and we see that today, don't we? If you look around, subhanAllah, you'll see a lot of people who claim that they have certain abilities and powers. They can tap into the divine, into alim al-ghayb, and they can tell you things, right? Sorcerers and fortune tellers and those things with the magic crystal ball and all those scams that go around, and they gather followings. And you even see, there's a documentary called Wild Wild Country. It was on Netflix. Watched it a couple of years ago, if I recall. It was about a man who came from India, and he set up an entire army in America. I think it was in Seattle. It wasn't in Seattle, but it might have been in Portland, Oregon, in that region. And he had all these white people following him. He had Indians following him. He made his whole little cult. It was literally a cult. It was a religion. They took over an entire area, and they had their own police. They had their own army. They were taking over an air base. They had their own system entirely. This was a threat even to the U.S. government. They had to take him out. Very long story. It's an interesting documentary, and it's all based on a true story. This was in the 70s, but there were many like this who still exist today, running around claiming that they are some sort of supreme leader who talk to God, they are prophets of God. We still have these liars running around, and if they don't necessarily say that they are prophets, they say that they have some sort of divine connection. They may not necessarily be a prophet, but they have some ability to kind of see into the ghaib, who can help you out, who can tell you your future, who can tell you how to solve your problems and give you some sort of, tap into the universe and tap into your powers and your energies, and all these scams start coming to surface. Those are all false prophets. These are all dajjals, mini dajjals. A dajjal is a liar, right? So these are mini dajjals running around, pretending to be something they're not. And oftentimes, if they're not just making up pure garbage, they are working with the jinn. They're still making up lies, but they're working with the jinn. So there's like different tiers, right? Some who actually work with the jinn, and some who just, float around and just make up nonsense on a screen and they gather a following. But nevertheless, false prophets exist, and it takes two to make a lie work. The person who's telling you the lie, and the person who's being lied to accepting the lie. SubhanAllah. So we ask Allah to grant us the wisdom and knowledge and ability to see these lies and falsehoods as falsehoods. Because for a lie to work, I have to be gullible enough and I have to be naive enough to believe this scam. And I could do so if I have no knowledge of my own, nor intuitive powers, nor firasa, for example, to be able to read a person and say, you're scamming me. I can see right through the scam. And a lot of us here, alhamdulillah, have that ability, right? The guy's a scam. You can just tell a mile away. But there's a lot out there who don't necessarily have that ability, and just someone sounds very charismatic and they seem to know what they're talking about. They seem very confident. It's like, well, hang on a second, he may know something and I need to listen. And then it's like slowly but surely you start to get sucked into this little vortex of scams, and you start to believe that this person has ultimate truth, and you start to listen to whatever they say, and it becomes like a Quran to you. SubhanAllah. And may Allah protect us from that. And so these false prophets start popping up. Nothing new. It's generation after generation, there's always a scammer going on. And this Musaylim al-Kadhdab, he gathers a force of around 40,000 strong in a town called Al-Yamama, right? Let me just go through down to the Yamama battle. Al-Yamama, Abu Bakr anhu says, essentially, that this threat it needs to be annihilated immediately. There is no room for your little scams. The Muslims, the genuine Muslims, are still standing strong. But those who are new to the religion, those who subscribe to the religion out of political gain or social status gain and so forth, those guys who are very shaky and those who've actually left the deen, they need to be dealt with immediately. So we need to show a strong hand. So he sends his armies out to Yamama to fight Musaylim al-Kadhdab under the leadership of none other than Khalid bin Walid, the best military commander, the best strategic military commander on the face of the earth. Till date, they still teach his biography and they teach his military strategizing methods in universities today. People still say, in Western universities, they will teach the stories of Khalid bin Walid as to, it's unthinkable. How did you manage to destroy these great nations? And we'll come to that, inshallah, with the Byzantine Empire, with the Sassanids and the Persian Empire, as to how did you do this? With such small numbers, you're able to take down these massive nations who've been around for thousands of years. I mean, the Persian Empire has been around for a very, very long time, right? The Roman Empire, which is the Byzantine Empire, has been around for several thousand years, and you just destroy them. And it's like, hang on a second, you're just a bunch of Arabs. What do you guys know? You know, you're just in a desert. Nobody really cares about you because you have no good land, you have no fertility in your land, you have nothing. You have to trade, and you have to trade from the other places, Yemen and Levant. You have to keep doing this Rihlat al-Shita'i wal-Sayf because you guys have nothing, essentially. And you guys are coming to challenge an empire that's been around for thousands of years with all kinds of sophisticated weapons and technology. It's like, hang on a second, something's off. But anyway, Khalid bin Walid gets sent out. And the Battle of Yamama is a big battle. What happens is Khalid bin Walid, they start taking a few good hits, right? They're under attack because they're fighting 40,000. It's a massive army. But eventually, obviously, the Muslims win. But Khalid bin Walid, to make that win happen, has to strategize in a few different ways. One thing that he does, by the way, that's highlighted in this battle, is he puts the Huffaz of the Quran, the ones who knew the Quran, the Hafidhin, he puts them in the front line, and he reminds them that you essentially are fighting for the survival of Islam. This is a big deal, because this is, right now, it's the biggest threat and force that's against the Muslims. The Byzantines are doing their own thing. You know, they're up there in Europe, in that region, they're doing their own thing. They're kind of in Levant as well. The Persians are doing their own thing. They have some problems in Iraq with the Persians. That's all kind of going down. You have the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire doing their own thing. We'll get to you in a minute. But right now, our critical enemy right now is this Yamama battle that's going down with the leadership of Musaylim al-Kadhdab, who's claiming to be a prophet. Like, he's not just an outsider enemy, it's an insider enemy. He's claiming to be a prophet. This is a very big deal. With the other guys, like, I know who you are, Zoroastrians and so forth. You guys are Christians, you guys are Jews. It's kind of clear. Everyone kind of knows everybody. But with this, especially for the new Muslims, especially for the ones who are weak on their faith, the ones who were hypocrites, the ones who backpedaled, they're all confused and they're malfunctioning. So this is a very big, decisive battle. And so he puts the Huffaz in the front, and he tells them that you guys are fighting for the survival of Islam, right? Eventually, they win. However, that win comes at the cost of many of those Huffaz's lives. A lot of them died, and that's significant because that will be one of the next achievements that Abu Bakr anhu does, which is the compilation of the Quran. So a lot of the Huffaz die in this battle. But eventually, Musaylim al-Kadhdab is killed. How was he killed? Now, there was a man in Uhud, right, the Battle of Uhud, years ago. There was a man called Al-Wahshi. Al-Wahshi was a man who was from Quraysh. He was a slave. He was from Quraysh. And he killed the Prophet ﷺ's uncle, Hamza, with a spear, right? He killed him in a very disgusting and heinous way. And he took out his liver and he ate it raw, him and Abu Lahab's wife, and it was some disgusting crime that was committed. And later on, Al-Wahshi becomes Muslim, many years later, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. But the Prophet ﷺ accepts his Islam, and obviously now you're Muslim, everything in the past is forgiven, but he says, I don't want to ever see your face. Because it's like, you're the guy who killed my beloved uncle. Hamza was the Lion of Allah, that was his title, Asadullah, and he was killed in such a disgusting way. It's like, I don't want to ever see you. This Wahshi man, who's Muslim, now makes a second appearance. That was his first appearance in Uhud. Then he becomes Muslim, and Prophet says, I don't want to see your face. Years later, he's in this battle with Khalid ibn al-Walid, and he throws a spear, and he kills Musaylim al-Kadhab, and he ends his life. And that's how Musaylimah goes down. That battle's over. A lot of the Huffaz have died. A lot of the Muslims are lost. They lose their lives in this battle. But this threat is now annihilated. So now, what happens is, after this battle, this is now the second achievement of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, which is the compilation of the Quran. Up until then, the Quran is the recitation. That's what it's called, right? The Quran is the recitation. So it's not written. It wasn't compiled in a book, essentially. It was written on leaves, it was written on stones, it was written on bones, it was written on whatever they could write on. They would just write the verses down. So that all had to be compiled. And everybody knew the Quran by heart. It was the recitation. They would listen to it and they would learn it. And a lot of those Huffaz just died in this battle, the Battle of Yamama. So now we have a problem. We've killed the external threat that was an internal threat, i.e. not the Persian Empire or the Byzantine Empire. We've annihilated this threat, but now we have an internal problem where the majority of the people who knew the Quran have died. We're getting old. We need to make sure that this is preserved, not because of any reason other than we don't want people to come in later and start saying, well, if I recall correctly, this might have been in the Quran, and now the people are going to get fewer in number, those who know the Quran, because the majority of them now have died. There's only a few left, and those guys eventually are going to die in the next few years. Now, who's going to correct anybody if you've made a mistake? So you need to have a source, something to come back to. Umar ibn Khattab is the one who presents this idea to Abu Bakr. He says, I think we should compile the Quran. Abu Bakr responds and says, how can I do something the Prophet ﷺ never did? I.e., he's saying, how can I do, and he's understanding this as a bid'ah. A bid'ah is an innovation, right? An innovation can be two ways. An innovation can be bid'ah fi dunya or bid'ah fi din. There are two types of innovation. Innovation in the dunya means an innovation, like you've created something. Like an airplane is an innovation. We've invented it, as a people. A car is an innovation. Anything that you've seen that is new, a new technology, is an innovation. This was something that was innovative in its literal definition. An innovation in the deen, same concept applies, but it's not allowed. It doesn't work. You can't add to the deen, to the aqidah. Fiqh and deriving fiqh and jurisprudence is something different. Based on the current situation that you're in, you try to apply the standard laws and rules that existed at the time. But with the aqidah, there is nothing more to add. And in Surah Al-Ma'idah, الْيَوْمَ أَكْمَلْتُ لَكُمْ دِينَكُمْ وَأَتْمَمْتُ لَكُمْ نِعْمَتِي وَرَضِيتُ لَكُمُ الْإِسْلَامَ دِينًا. Today I have completed your deen upon you and chosen the Islam as a deen for you. It's done. It's completed. You can't add any more to it. The glass is full. Add one more drop, it overflows, it doesn't work. So you can't add anything like that. So Abu Bakr was worried. He's like, well, this is a deen thing. Is this a bid'ah? Like, how am I supposed to do something the Prophet ﷺ didn't do? After Umar ibn Khattab convinces him that this is not a bid'ah, this is rather a method for us to just preserve that we have a source to come back to. Something that we can work with just in case. We're not changing anything. We're not adding to the deen. We're not adding anything. We're just taking what we know in our heads and we're writing it down. Abu Bakr accepts. He concedes and he says, fair enough, let's do it. He tasks a man called Zayd bin Thabit. Zayd bin Thabit was one of the original scribes of the Rasul. He wrote a lot of the ahadith down, by the way, and he wrote a lot of the Quran down. Zayd bin Thabit later says about this task that he was given, he says, Wallahi, had they asked me to move a mountain, it would have been an easier task for me than to compile the Quran. Yani, try to imagine the magnitude of this task. You're the guy who's making 1000% sure that this Quran is written down with 10 billion% accuracy. That every fatha, every kasra, and there are 7 different variations to read the Quran. There are 7 qira'at for the Quran, and this was an authentic hadith. There are seven ways to read the Quran. So all of this needs to be put down. And how are you going to get this? Well, you got to go pick up the sticks that have it written on it, the stones, the leaves. You have to go talk to all the Qur'an, and everybody has to recite it, and everybody else has to kind of agree. It's like a ledger. It's like, well, you read Qul huwallahu ahad. Everybody agrees? How do you say it? How do you say it? How do you say it? This was a task. This was no easy, just a quick, let's just put something together and write it down. And what do you remember? What do you remember? Let's just put it together. No, it has in the right order, with the right pronunciation, the right words, the right chapters, in the right order. Everything has to be put down. And it's got to be verified and validated and cross-checked and back and forth until this little compilation is put together. This compilation gets given to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. He keeps it. Later on, he passes it to Umar ibn Khattab, and then it gets passed on to Hafsa, Umar ibn Khattab's wife, and then later on it gets to Uthman radiallahu anhu, who was the third caliph, and we'll talk about him and what he did with the compilation of the Quran and the distribution of the Quran in his time all the way to Egypt and everything, because that also has a reason behind it. There were new Muslims who were coming in and they were reciting things in an incorrect way, and so they needed a resource to come back to. They needed an actual source. So there's a whole distribution channel that gets created, and logistics managements and so forth of the Quran's compilation and distribution throughout the region. But for now, he compiles the first compilation, first put together of what we call the Quran book, when the Quran is actually a recitation. And that was his second achievement, which was the compilation of the Quran. Now, so he does the battle, he does the Ridda Wars, and he does the compilation of the Quran in his time. Now this is all within 2 years and 3 months, 27 months. This is what he's got to do. This is what he's got to deal with. Aside from that, that's a big enough task to put the Quran together and to launch a massive war against a few big-time liars in the region, and keep the Muslim Ummah together, and run a state, and collect the zakat, and make sure everybody's taken care of, and make sure that the Muslims are still getting up and praying, they're still learning the deen, they're still setting up madrasas, they're building out houses. All of that's going on under his watch. At the same time, remember those 2 external forces that we talked about? We had the Byzantine Empire, which is the Romans, and then we had the Persian Empire, at that time the Sassanids. Those 2 super forces, America and the UK, America and Israel, whatever you want to compare them to today, those 2 super forces are still there. And they're starting to cause problems. The Byzantine Empire on the west they're already in the Levant region, and word gets out that they're starting to set up a campaign to go against the Arabs, just to kind of like, what are you guys doing? You look like you're starting to create a force. Let's just, crush you while you guys are still small. So this is a plot that's going on in the Byzantines' minds, right? They're like, let's just get rid of you while you're still small. The Persians are causing issues in Iraq. There's a lot of Muslims in Iraq, in that region. So not Iraq specifically, not the country Iraq, but in that region, right? So Mosul and Baghdad and so forth. There's a lot of issues there that are happening with the Persians. They're coming in and they're trying to take over the lands. They're trying to kill the Muslims. They're trying to bring in their religions, which is essentially Zoroastrianism and so forth, and they're rejecting Islam. So there's some problems happening there, and the Muslims there are under threat. And so now this little Muslim ummah that's kind of new to the game of empires and domination steps up. And we're not just going to attack one superpower, we're going to attack both superpowers, and we're not going to do it consecutively, we're going to do it simultaneously. We're going to attack you guys, and we're going to attack you guys. And both of you guys have to deal with that. And they're both not expecting this in their wildest dreams. They're like, hang on, a bunch of Arabs with some camels? It's like, well, I'm not sure what's going on. The Byzantine, by the way, the Byzantine Empire and the Persian Empire hate each other. They've had wars for centuries. They absolutely hate each other, and they have massive battles. One of the biggest one was the Battle of Karahai, which was ages ago, right? Ages ago. I'm not even going to watch a history lesson about this. There's a massive battle that kind of dictated the outcome and the terms of, who's going to be on which side of the Euphrates River, and the Persians get to keep this land, and the Romans get to keep this land, and there was a whole thing. But they hate each other. They absolutely hate each other. So these two, they're the superpowers, but they're also the biggest enemies of each other. So as they're kind of studying each other's steps, strategizing against each other, here comes somebody from the side and just attacks us. I was like, well, hang on a second. I just got sidetracked. Who are you? I mean, I heard that there was a bunch of guys walking around in the desert with some camels, and you guys said you had a prophet, but it's like, nobody cares. That's their mindset. And it's like, well, hang on a second. Now Khalid bin Walid shows up at the Battle of the Chains. That was one of the first battles, by the way, which was in the Iraqi region against the Persians, and he destroys them. And they're like, well, one second, I thought you guys were a nobody. And they just get destroyed. And that opens up the path for further battles that happen between the Muslims and the Persian Empire, that finally results in the demise and the end and the annihilation of the Persian Empire at the hands of Umar ibn Khattab. And the same thing happens with the Byzantine Empire. With the Byzantine Empire, they start going into battles, little mini battles. There's no massive war yet, that comes later. They go into mini battles with the Muslims in the Levant region. The Levant region is Palestine, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon, that whole zone over there, which was under Roman control. Now, when I went to Syria, I went to Daraa, and in Daraa there's a whole Roman amphitheater. I think I sent you guys some videos on the Telegram. Daraa was the breadbasket for the Roman Empire. A lot of the farming that was done in Daraa was to produce, goods and crops to send over to the Roman Empire. So they had a full, stronghold in the region. And as the Roman Empire was in decline for the last few centuries, because they were in decline for a very long time. They had backstabbing to each other. They were breaking up within. They had the Kingdom of Sicily trying to separate themselves from the Roman Empire. They had the French. They had the Normans. They had the Vikings coming in. They had a million of their own little internal problems. They had the Norse, the Nordmen, right, the Northmen. They would all come in, and there was a lot of problems that were going on with the Roman Empire. Aside from that, they had their problems with the Persians, who kept fighting them back and forth. The Persians themselves had their own backstabbing problems. Everybody's trying to become the next emperor who wants to rule Persia. So now both of these guys are getting sidetracked from their main battle and their main internal politics and affairs with a bunch of Arabs who just showed up on the scene. It's like, hey, I'm here to play. And they destroy them. And so they're like, well, one second, what's going on? And this is under the leadership on the ground by Khalid bin Walid, which is fascinating. And this guy was busy. I mean, sometimes, subhanAllah, your friend calls you and it's like, oh, I'm busy. I'm really, this guy's always busy. It's like, well, Khalid bin Walid was super busy. In these few years, from Abu Bakr As-Siddiq, who's launching these campaigns against the Byzantine Empire and the Persian Empire, all the way till the end of them with Umar ibn Khattab and the taking over of Masjid al-Aqsa under Umar ibn Khattab's rule, which we'll cover inshallah when we get to Umar ibn Khattab. Khalid bin Walid's running around, battle to battle. I mean, at one point he was in a battle with the Byzantine Empire, and he gets pulled out to go into a battle with the Persian Empire. Like, I'm in the middle of a war. No, I need you in that war. As you're fighting this one, figure it out, run off, finish this war, and then come back and continue. It's fascinating. I mean, they were going nuts in every direction, and these two superpowers could not keep up with what is happening right now. I mean, I'm sorry, what? Can you try to understand how fascinating this is? These are two superpowers who've been around for thousands of years, and they just got destroyed. With no precursor. They just wake up one day and we just got destroyed by a bunch of Arabs. Again, I keep saying bunch of Arabs in this methodology, because to them it's like, what are you? You're a bunch of Arabs from the desert. What do you guys know? We've been around for thousands of years. We have the technology, we have the armies, we have the money, we have everything. We're the superpower. And I was like, I can't take you seriously. And then they get destroyed simultaneously, which is fascinating. And this is all under the rule of Abu Bakr As-Siddiq, who's initiating these campaigns, because he saw that these things are going to cause, these two enemies are going to cause a problem very, very, very soon. If we don't attack first, we don't take a preemptive strike against them, they're going to infiltrate, and this is going to be a problem. So he foresaw this, and so he sets out the armies and he sets everything in motion, which then concludes with the Khilafah of Umar ibn Khattab, and he ends that and he wins all these battles. Again, under the leadership of Khalid bin Walid in those battles. And there's a whole change of leadership on the armies from Umar ibn Khattab, and we'll cover that inshallah when we get to Umar ibn Khattab's story. And so coming back, the battles take place, and these are the expansion efforts that are done by Abu Bakr As-Siddiq, right? Now, the battles, there's so much to cover in them, but they're not necessarily part of the story that we're sticking to today. So I'm just giving you highlights of what was going on in the region, who's fighting who and under whose command, and why are these things happening, and so forth. This is all under Abu Bakr As-Siddiq. Now we come after these battles. They're still going on, right? Because they don't end until Umar ibn Khattab's reign, when he becomes Khalifa. In Jumada al-Thani, the 13th year of Al-Hijrah, the year 634 CE, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq falls ill, and he passes away. he passes away at the age of 63, the same age as the Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam. He passes away 2 years after the death of the Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, 2 years and 3 months. That was the reign of his caliphate, that was it. On his deathbed, he nominates his successor. He says, Umar ibn al-Khattab, you're next. The reins are now with you. I have done my part. You are next to lead the Muslim Ummah into all the great days that are going to come. And before he dies, he instructs the Muslims. He says, I'm going to paraphrase it, he says, shroud me, like bury me in the clothes that I die in. Because the living have more need for new clothes than the dead. Because when we die, we get a shroud. We get the kafan, and we wrap ourselves, subhanAllah, we get wrapped in the kafan, the white sheet. So he says, just bury me in what I die in. There's no need to go buy a new kafan, a new shroud for me. Use that money to buy new clothes for the living. The living need those clothes more than the dead. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu passes away. And he is buried in Masjid al-Nabawi next to the Rasul alayhi salatu wassalam. And then later on, Umar ibn al-Khattab will also be buried in that same room, which was Hujrat Aisha radiallahu anhu, the room of Aisha radiallahu anha. And so now we come to the conclusion of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. So, with what we've covered so far, we understand that this is no ordinary man. This was a man who had foresight. This was a man who had extreme levels of intelligence. He was a man who was a genealogist. He was a man who had a very strong holding on the science of firasa, the ability to read people. This was a man who fought for justice, and he didn't accept anything less than 100% justice. Even in the Jahiliyyah days, pre-Islam, he was part of Hilf al-Fudul. He was part of this activism movement, right? Where he would go around and make sure that the rights of the people were served and that everybody was treated fairly. He was the closest and best friend of the Rasul ﷺ. Yani of all the people who would, at the drop of a hat, give up their lives for the Rasul ﷺ. How many were there? Hundreds? Thousands? Tens of thousands of people? Muslims who would do that? He was the best out of all of them. The Rasul ﷺ chose him to be his best friend, chose him to be his companion to do the hijrah from Mecca to Medina. He put him as the successor after the Rasul ﷺ. That's the Prophet himself, ﷺ, of all the men, says, you are the best person for the job. Imagine what kind of a resume this person has. The Prophet ﷺ himself says, you are the right man. It's not like, well, there's nobody else to kind of fill the position, so we'll just, we'll go with whoever's the best. No, you are the best. You're the right man for the job. You take over, and I trust you fully and wholly. This was a man who sacrificed everything he owned for the sake of Islam, and we saw that with the Battle of Tabuk. This was a man who threw himself in front of the Prophet ﷺ to protect him. He took a bullet for him in the Battle of Uhud, when the Muslim ranks were, dispersed because they disobeyed the direct order of the Prophet ﷺ. This was a man who comforted the Prophet ﷺ in the Battle of Badr, when he constantly and wouldn't stop making dua to Allah to provide victory for the Muslims, because he was so worried. And this is the first battle, and he comes to him and he puts his cloak back on, he puts his cover back on, and he says, Ya Rasulullah, enough. You have made your dua. Allah will not turn you down. He provides that comfort. He's the one who gets stung in a cave and cries out of the pain, but makes sure that he stays in his position to not waken the Prophet ﷺ, just to not wake him up, not even cause him pain, just to make sure that he's comfortable. He sits there in tears. SubhanAllah. He's the man who believed the Prophet ﷺ, the first man. Do you know how difficult that is? Do you know how difficult that, today, for a revert, as difficult as it is, and I have the utmost respect for reverts, it's no easy task, right? It's no easy endeavor. It's something that literally deserves the highest level of respect, for a person to leave what they know, their culture and their religion, and in most cases their families have problems with them, to leave all of that and to walk a path by themselves, to accept a religion that is foreign to them, that is alien to them, to adopt its cultures and its teachings that are so alien, especially those in the West who are not familiar with how, because if you're in the Arab world and you're not Muslim, you're still very familiar with how Muslims operate. You see them kind of on a daily basis, you interact with them, you hear the language, you hear the words, you hear what they say, you still have some familiarity. And it's still difficult, but you still have something. But in the Western cultures, where you come from a background that has nothing to do with how Islam presents itself and what it teaches, and in terms of its ethics and morals and backgrounds and understandings, for you to accept that path, that is something that is literally deserving of the highest level of respect. But with that being said, it is, and I mean no disrespect to any reaver, I hope you understand my point by now, with how much I'm praising them. That is nothing in comparison to being the first reaver, let's say, when there's nobody else on the face of the earth who's a reaver. You're the first person. It's you. There's nobody else out there. There's no, well, there's like 2 billion Muslims. They must be onto something. They can't all be wrong. There has to be, there's Google. I can go look up something and I could say, well, there's a lot of people who kind of agree that this makes sense. There's a lot of people to kind of tell me, there's strength in numbers. You go to the States, yeah, okay, it's mostly Christian or atheist, but you still see a good chunk of Muslims. You go anywhere, you find mosques. There's people. You can find something. There's a support system somewhere. I can figure something out. But no, you're the first. There's no, where are you going to go? There's nobody. It's just you. What kind of, I can't even imagine that. And especially in a culture where your belief system is associated with your tribal alliances. And by abandoning that, you lose your support system, you lose your financial status, you lose your social status, you lose your political influence and status, you lose everything. You get ostracized, you get ridiculed, you get harmed. Now, if you become a reaver, nobody's running around with stones and trying to kill you, for the most part. Nobody's doing that. Okay, at worst, and it's awful as it is, at worst you kind of get, some of your family don't want to talk to you anymore, which is awful, and may Allah make it easy for those reverts, but you get that, right? You may get fired from a job. That's kind of the extent of it, but no one's physically harming you. No one's sitting there beating you up and blood's, running down your face. You're not getting that. You're not being pulled into a desert, scorching hot desert, putting rocks on you and whipping you until the skin off your back literally melts off. You're not getting that. Those people went through that, and the first of them to understand, because of his genealogy expertise, because of his firasa, was able to understand that by doing so, I'm abandoning what everybody here holds so dear, not just because of religious affiliations, but because this religious affiliation gave political power to Quraysh, because all the tribes in the Arabian Peninsula all had their little mini-gods kind of there as hostage, right? So if anybody messes with Quraysh, Quraysh is going to come and just chop the head off the god. And it's like, all right, now what are you going to do? I just killed your god. So you want me to protect your God? You better respect Quraysh. So you give us free passage. Whenever we pass through Arabia, no one's allowed to rob us. No one's allowed to touch us. So you get privileged status. You're kind of a VIP in the region. Nobody talks to the Qurayshis. You're a big deal. Because if we mess with you, you mess with our little plastic God and you chop its head off and that's it. That's a problem. So we have an understanding. So when you abandon that, when you leave that faith that is so intertwined with your social position and everything else therein, meaning your entire life, you are literally throwing yourself out into the woods as a sheep among wolves and saying, all right, let's go. It's a very, very, very dangerous position. So it takes a tremendous amount, something that we can't even compute, a tremendous amount of bravery and courage to be able to take that stance. And that's what this man did. That's what this man did. He stood against the entire world. He stood against the entire world. His world, internally in the Arabian region, and everyone else. There's no other Muslims. It's just him. He took that stance. One man versus the world. Literally. He took that stance. Now, the Rasul has direct communication with Allah through the wahi, through Jibreel alayhi salam. Abu Bakr is trusting a man and changing his entire life and putting his life on the line, literally, in every way possible that you can imagine. Immediately, without even thinking about it twice. It's not like, well, I'm really going to get into a lot of no, I don't care. I accept. There's not even like, well, just give me, can I have 5 minutes? I just need to think about it. I accept. Let that sink in. SubhanAllah. That's the man we're talking about. That's Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, one of the greatest companions. And now, to conclude with Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, there's another verse that Ibn al-Jawzi, I believe it was Ibn al-Jawzi who said that all the ulama have ijma' and they concluded, they're in agreement that this verse is specifically for Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. And this verse is in chapter 92, Surah Al-Layl, right? And the verse says, in Arabic, وَسَيَتَجَنَّبُهَا الْأَتْقَى الَّذِي يَأْتِي مَالَهُ يَتَزَكَّى وَمَا لِأَحَدٍ عِنْدَهُ مِنْ نِعْمَةٍ تُجْزَى إِلَّا ابْتِغَاءَ وَجْهِ رَبِّهِ الْأَعْلَى وَلَسَوْفَ يَرْضَى. Now let me translate it to you in English. I'm going to read the translation so I don't mess it up. And the one who is most pious, this is fascinating, not the one who's pious, I mean, at-taqi, taqwa is piety, and that's a rough translation. Taqwa is piety. If you have piety, you're taqi. If you are atqa, you are the most pious. And this is in the Quran, from Allah, right? And the one who is the most pious will be kept away from it. So يَجَنَّبُهَا الْأَتْقَى. Kept away from what? From hell. He who spends his wealth for increase in self-purification. الَّذِي يُؤْتِي مَالَهُ يَتَزَكَّى. For self-purification. And no one has with him any favor for which he should be rewarded. Yani, this is not a man who's putting his life on the line, who's giving up his wealth, who's sacrificing everything that he has and owns and does and knows and his time and everything. So that people can say, wow, what a guy. Well, he's a really, really kind, generous guy. But that guy, man, he's something. People do that, right? And it's like, well, everybody thinks I'm a good guy. I have such a good reputation. Hang on a second. TikTok thinks I'm a robot. Everybody thinks, well, Khalid Shaheen is such a generous guy. He's always giving out sadaqah. He's always giving out zakah. Wherever he goes, he just gives out people money. Wherever he sees trouble, he helps people. Wow, this guy, that can get to your head. And that's where you get into kibr. Here, Allah, it's not like this is up for debate. Allah is saying, He's not doing this for anybody, for any recognition. I don't care what you think, what you say. I am doing this purely with 0.0000 infinity ounce of any other reason. This is purely 1000% for God, and that is it. And no one has with him any favor for which he should be rewarded, but only seeking the countenance of his Lord, the Most High. This is the finale of this ayah is beautiful. This is a promise, right? وَلَسَوْفَ يَرْضَى. So he's doing all of this. So he's the most pious. That's the first amazing privilege. He's the most pious. That's even in the Quran. And he's doing everything that he's doing, all the sacrifices that he gives in whatever way they are. Not for recognition, not for status, not for fame, not for power, not for gain in any way. Purely for the sake of Allah. So that he can gain Allah's favor. And Allah then says, because in the Quran, there's a lot of verses that say, if you're a believer, then the believers are promised so and so if you do so and so. There's usually an if and conditional statement. You can get so and so, you can get Jannah, you can get rewarded, you can get rizq, you can get so and so if you are XYZ. But we don't have a guarantee. That's the case, right? We don't. I mean, you can be the best Muslim possible, and we still enter Jannah purely because of the rahmah of Allah. Allah allows us to enter paradise, inshallah. May Allah make us of those people who enter paradise because of His rahmah. Then our deeds, but it's merely because of Allah's rahmah. He, because of His infinite mercy, decides that you guys belong in paradise. Then we look at the deeds. Here, He gives them the guarantee. وَلَسَوْفَ يَرْضَى. And He shall be pleased. Yeah, and He's doing all this for the sake of Allah, and Allah's saying, you'll be pleased. Don't worry. We got you. You're covered. So it's a done deal. That Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, وَلَسَوْفَ يَرْضَى. That he will be pleased with the outcome of all the efforts and all the sacrifices that he did throughout the entirety of his life. With that, say alhamdulillah, we've completed and concluded the story of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. If anything that I said was incorrect, then forgive me, it is purely my mistake. And if anything that I said is correct, then alhamdulillah, the knowledge is not mine. Obviously, you guys know me by now. I'm not a sheikh, I'm not a mufti. I collect the knowledge, I listen to the scholars, I read the books, I put the notes together, and I present them to you. That inshallah it is purely a doorway, as I keep saying, that you can then go further and explore the biography of this man, or whatever else it is that we talk about. It's just showing you the way, that this is what we're dealing with, this is who we're talking about. Go on and read more about it. There's so much more. I mean, we've done, say, 3 hours in total of the story of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. 3 hours? You think that does justice to this man's story? Not at all. Doesn't even do 1% of that. But this is just a touch on it. And so with that, say alhamdulillah, and jazakumullah khair all for listening and sticking it through with me. Well, we got through the story of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. The next, inshallah, the next person we'll talk about is the second of the 10 Mubashirin bil Jannah, the second Khalifa in the Muslim Ummah, Umar ibn al-Khattab al-Faruq, the one who was the decisive person between al-Haqq wal-Batil. That's why he's called al-Faruq, and we'll cover his nickname as well once we get to Umar ibn al-Khattab. And so with that, I conclude our daily broadcast. Thank you all for tuning in.